What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo Fantasy Football YouTube channel. And today we are beginning our positional preview videos talking top 12 quarterbacks ahead of the 2022 fantasy football season. I am joined by Nick Lepri. He is on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy to break it all down for you. Nick, how are you doing? We're about a week and a half removed from the draft now, almost 2 weeks. Things are starting to settle in, and we're kind of in that dead time, but fantasy football is picking up. How are you feeling?
I am very excited to talk about the quarterbacks today. I feel a lot more confident in my actual takes now that the draft is over. Things are going to change. Injuries are going to happen by the time that real drafts roll around in August. But right now, I feel a lot more confident in my rankings. I'm very excited to talk about the quarterbacks today.
I actually feel pretty confident too. I thought there was a potential we would get more first round draft capital for some of these quarterbacks and maybe some unsettled situations. But now I'm feeling pretty decent about guys like Tannehill. And man, I don't know what Carolina's going to do, but I think Sam Darnold probably plays a couple weeks. We're not going to talk about Sam Darnold today, but I think it just solidified some of the positional value for some of the later round quarterbacks. That'll probably be discussed in a future video. But before we get started with this, I want to talk to you guys about our sponsor, Underdog. If you don't know Underdog, they have all sorts of contests available to you guys. They have best ball drafts, they have fantasy drafts, they have pick'em contests where you can win up to 20 extra entry fee. But they also just released their $10 million best ball tournament. It has a $1 million grand prize. Yes, $1 million. That is crazy, but it is only $25 to enter this, and it is just way too good to pass up. You can also use the promo code Awesemo for a first match deposit bonus up to $100. So make sure to check out Underdog today. Nick, you ready to get into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we are doing our consensus rankings. Nick and I each have individual rankings that will be available to you on the Awesemo platform. But for the purpose of this video, we are going to talk consensus top 12. And I think there's a pretty interesting discussion to be had at number 12. The player we have in our consensus is actually Matthew Stafford, and you have him a bit higher than me. He was actually my QB 13, but I'll be honest with you. I had a really difficult time between Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford. Aaron Rodgers, if we were to expand this, would have been our quarterback 13, but he just narrowly misses this behind Stafford. So tell me why you like the Rams signal caller ahead of this season.
Yeah, I just think that when it comes to Matthew Stafford and Aaron Rodgers, it is definitely close, right? It's not like I am going to stand here and tell you and declare that, oh, Aaron Rodgers, there's no way he could be a top 12 quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the season he finished as the MVP yet again for the third time in a row. But here, the reason why I like Matthew Stafford so much is that even without Robert Woods, they now get Allen Robinson. They lose Odell Beckham. I just feel very comfortable with Matthew Stafford. I just really liked what I saw last year. I liked a lot what I saw in Detroit. And with a team that I feel as though is going to compete yet again deep into the playoffs. The playoffs don't mean too much for fantasy football, but I just mean that this is going to be a very good team yet again this year. And even though Matthew Stafford doesn't have some crazy rushing upside, he doesn't really have any rushing upside at all. He had 43 rushing yards last year, no rushing touchdowns. But even with that said, he's just going to pass the ball at such a high rate. And I expect him to basically put up similar numbers to last year where he was quarterback 6 on the season. He was quarterback 11 in points per game. So probably closer to quarterback 12.
Yeah, I think Stafford's fine in this range. I think it's tough between him and Rodgers. Obviously, with Rodgers, you have the exiting talent in Devonta Adams. Like you mentioned with Stafford, they are losing some pieces, but they're also putting at least a small bandage over those. And depending on what
Yeah.
you think of Allen Robinson, that could be a caliber talent similar to Allen Robinson, maybe a little bit worse, maybe a little bit better. We'll have to see. But overall, I think Stafford as a facilitator of the offense, especially from a pass game perspective, has been fantastic. The issues I have with Stafford and why I put Rodgers a little bit higher. In neutral game scripts, the Packers are just a little more pass friendly than the Rams historically. Now, that could change. Again, the exiting talent in Green Bay is something to monitor here. But honestly, that is why it is such a difficult decision for me, because you could honestly see the Rams take a step forward with their pass rate, something they've done in the past, and you could see the Packers take a step back. Neither of these quarterbacks are spreading chickens by any means, but Rodgers being the elder signal caller, it wouldn't be too surprising to see him take a step back too. So honestly, we're splitting hairs here. I think once you get around this 12 mark, either Rodgers or Stafford are okay. I think the safer play is Matthew Stafford. But let's go to number 11. It is Russell Wilson. So with Russell Wilson, we have the changing team, and I think that's going to be the biggest discussion point here. He disappointed last year, but I don't think that was any fault of his own. that Pete Carroll offense was the slowest in the NFL by a wide margin. They were 18th in neutral pass rate, which is pretty bad considering their run game, and they have Russell Wilson on their roster. But now he's moving over to Denver, and Denver changed coaching staff, so you're going to see Nathaniel Hackett at the helm. He has experience with Green Bay, and as we just talked about, that Green Bay offense historically has been very pass-heavy. So overall, I'm expecting the attempts, the completions, the yards per game, all to rise for Wilson. What do you think his fit in Denver is going to look like?
Yeah, this is a very good jump to make going from Seattle to Denver. I have never really been the biggest fan of Russell Wilson in fantasy football, but I do think that this landing spot is quite advantageous for him. Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, just to name a few of the weapons there. They do lose Noah Fant in that trade, but they do have Albert O, whose name I'm not going, or his last name I'm just not going to try to pronounce, right? I don't know how to pronounce it, but Albert O, he's a pretty solid tight end as well. So I think that this situation here in Denver should be pretty solid for Russell Wilson. I would be shocked personally if he finished top 5 at the end of the season. I just don't think he is up to that caliber at this point in his career. But I do think overall he should be a top 12 quarterback. And if you ranked him as like quarterback 8, I wouldn't be surprised either, like if he finished that way.
I had him at quarterback 10, and I like everything you said. The weapons are solid. Jeudy, Sutton, Tim Patrick, I think, is a good wide receiver 3. You have KJ Hamler potentially coming back, hopefully giving you something off the season-ending injury. Albert Okwuegbunam, I know that name from college football, DFS, Missouri. And they also took a tight end pretty early in the draft, too. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Maybe they mix in some 2 tight end sets with Russell Wilson, and the reason I have him as QB 10 as well. So for me, it's a little bit higher, but still nothing close to the top 5. The rushing output for him has just dropped off. And could this change? I mean, sure, but he's getting up there in age. That's an issue. This will be his age 34 season. From 2020 to 2021, we saw his rushing output drop from 513 yards to 183. And again, some of that, the play volume was reduced, but that is still a very stark decrease in rushing volume. And with most of the players in range, let's say 7 to 12, the back half of our top 12, the rushing output or lack thereof is really what is keeping them from ascending into the top 5. With the quarterback play Russell Wilson's going to put on the field this year, is it similar to Josh Allen from a passing perspective? Maybe, but the rushing output is just lacking so much, so it kind of limits him. I am excited for the new offense, and I think there will be spike weeks. If we look last year, Russell Wilson didn't really have those. He only had 1 top 5 finish in 6 finishes in the top 10. It's one of the worst marks for a quarterback on this list. But again, we're just expecting the offense to change so much that it should benefit Wilson here. Anything else to add with him?
Yeah, like you said with the spike weeks, this division is just loaded. So there are going to be a lot of games where they are going back and forth with like the Chiefs, the Raiders, the Chargers, things like that. And that's going to help him out as well.
Agreed. Love that take. Let's move to number 10. This is a pure projection. It is Trey Lance from San Francisco. I would have him probably closer to the top 6 if I knew he was going to start every single game, but we're recording this very early in the offseason. It is May. We'll likely update this before the season, but we still have the Jimmy Garoppolo cloud hanging over our head. I think for the purposes of this video, let's assume there's some sort of decision with that, and we can maybe talk both scenarios, but what do you think the best case scenario with Lance is this year?
Yeah, I think that if Trey Lance was to start every single game, assuming that I don't even know what they're going to do with Jimmy Garoppolo because it doesn't seem like any other team even wants Jimmy Garoppolo, but assuming that Trey Lance is the guy, game number 1, I really do believe that he does have the upside to be a top 5 guy. It's only strictly because the rushing upside just means so much in fantasy football. If he is able to rush for 700 plus yards, if he's able to get 7, 8 plus rushing touchdowns, then he can easily find himself inside of the top 5. This San Francisco team, if they're able to keep Deebo Samuel as well, which almost seems like a guarantee at this point, this San Francisco offense is going to be amazing. The only argument you can make against it is, oh, maybe Mike McDaniel being gone, was that the keys to the city for the team? Was that the reason why they were so successful? Who knows? I don't think that's the whole reason why they were successful, but you never know. I think Trey Lance is a pretty talented player. We only saw him play 6 games last year, so there's not even much you can take from the stats, but he did rush a bunch. He did play in 6 games. He had 39 carries, 168 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown. I do expect him to rush a lot this season, and that is the biggest selling point by far for Lance.
Yeah, you said it. And we just want the games to be played. With Lance fitting in this 49ers offense, I think it's already kind of tailor-made to his style. They were 27th in neutral pass rate, 29th in pass rate overall. I think those probably are even a little lower if Trey Lance starts every single game. Remember, that was mostly Jimmy Garoppolo in there, and they were basically bottom 5 in the NFL in both pass rate overall and neutral game pass rate. But the concerns with Lance are still real. This is a player that was drafted in the top 3, but he was coming from the FCS level with very, very limited play. Not only because they had a COVID shortened season before he came out, but they were one of the run heaviest offenses in the entire country. Now, that's great for Lance on the ground, but it's very limiting for him as a passer. And I think we saw last year, a lot of people just assumed he was going to take over that job, but he did have some growth. The only thing I'm worried about is he's just not the prospect that people think he is because he's coming from the FCS level, sort of like a Carson Wentz. That could be a reason why they're keeping Garoppolo. In worst case scenario, I think Garoppolo starts and they split games throughout the year, which is why we still have him at QB10 and not pushing QB5 or 6, where he likely would be, assuming he starts every single game. Anything else to add?
No, not really. I think we kind of covered Trey Lance pretty good here.
All right, let's go to quarterback number 9. We're getting into the top 10 here, and this is where it gets fascinating to me. We have Dak Prescott, and he was one of the players where you and I diverged quite a bit in our rankings. You were lower on Prescott. I had him at QB7, and I could be argued either way. He was a very tough player for me to rank, and a lot of it came down to he's not rushing as much as he used to, and it's similar to Russell Wilson. Last year, he put up just 146 rushing yards. If Dak Prescott is going to be an pure pocket passer, I think he should be ranked closer to Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford. But if we do get that at least limited rushing ability, I think he could push towards top 5. What do you think Prescott's role is going to be this year?
Yeah, I think that we see a slight uptick compared to last year. Like you said, he only had 48 carries last year. I think that number should go up. I also think that if he was, you run the season back, he probably has more than one rushing touchdown most of the simulations of the season because that's just the times in which he's rushing is when he's closer to the goal line. I think that Dak Prescott is a great player. I think the Dallas Cowboys are a great team. They lose Amari Cooper, but that's not going to make me panic all the way on Dak Prescott. The reason why I don't have him ranked higher is because the other quarterbacks ahead of him are just so good in my book that it's hard to get him up there. And that's the biggest issue with doing quarterback rankings is because you can probably make an argument that 16, 17 quarterbacks could be thrown into the top 12. And this is like the only position where that argument is really there. So that's why I think talking about quarterbacks is just so fun. Dak was quarterback 7 on the season last year, 8 in points per game. He was very hit or miss. He had some games where this guy looked like legitimately the best quarterback in the NFL. If you watched week 1 last year up against Tampa Bay, he looked fantastic. And then there's games later on in the season up against the Washington football team where he absolutely eviscerates them. But then there's other games where he just doesn't play well at all. And I think we see a little bit more consistency with there not being too much injury concern around him this season. I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be top 10. And I don't hate your ranking of him being ranked a little bit higher. It is close with all these guys. But ultimately, I think Dak plays a little bit more consistent than last season.
Yeah, I like Dak. And just to put some numbers behind your inconsistency take, which I do agree with, he only had 3 top 5 finishes and he had 8 top 10 finishes. So that kind of just speaks to the amount of time he was playing near the top of the league and the amount of time he was not a top 10 quarterback, which was half the season last year. But overall, the offense is conducive to success. Overall, he was 6th in attempts per game, 4th in completions per game, 7th in passing yards per game, 8th in adjusted yards per attempt. So it's a pass-heavy offense. They were 6th in neutral pass rate. Neutral game script is just with the scores within a touchdown of each other, whether that's trailing or leading for reference. I've referenced that statistic a few times, so just so you guys know. And they were 2nd in plays per game. So it's an up-tempo pass-heavy scheme. The one thing that's lacking for me that we saw in previous seasons is the rushing ability. Was Dak still nursing some of the ankle? Maybe. It's really hard to say, but ultimately, I think we're in the same range with Prescott here. There's one player we'll talk about a little later that I want to get your take on compared to Prescott. And it won't be next. Next, we have Tom Brady. And I actually recently changed my rankings. I had Prescott 1 spot ahead of Brady. But after really digging into the advanced metrics, even at the advanced age, it's really hard not to rank Brady at least in the top 8. And it's just from the absurd passing volume he has. 1st in attempts per game, 1st in completions per game, 1st in passing yards per game, 1st in neutral game pass rate, 1st in pass rate overall, 3rd in plays per game. Bruce Arians is gone, but they hired in-house. Byron Leftwich is still there. The only concern maybe you have is Chris Godwin coming off the injury, but even he should play a majority of the season. I keep pushing Brady up my rankings, man. Talk me out of him if you can.
No, I don't think there's a way to talk you out of him, to be completely honest with you. Even though this guy has virtually zero rushing upside, he is still going to throw probably 5,000 yards this season. My only worry is that his passing touchdown rate last year was 6%. I think it's going to go back down closer to 5%. So maybe he doesn't throw 43 touchdowns, maybe he throws 38 or something like that. But even if he does that, he's still probably going to finish inside of the top five. The biggest worry with Tom Brady for me is eventually he's going to fall off. Eventually, I would think, right? There's no way this guy can keep playing, keep putting up these crazy numbers. But while I say that, there's no signs pointing towards the fact that he's going to fall off. So I think that ranking him inside the top 10 is a must. And even though he has no rushing upside, and I put so much weight into the rushing upside, would you be surprised at all if he was the number one quarterback at the end of the season at the age of 4,000? I wouldn't.
I think it would require maybe not a season-ending injury, but at least like Kyler Murray and Lamar to get nicked up, and maybe
Mhm.
even Hurts because of what they do on the ground. The rushing volume, as you mentioned, is worth so much respective to the passing.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, the top three finish wouldn't blow my mind at all. And number one overall, I mean, we've seen that happen with these pocket passers. You have the touchdown. So I think in that situation, he probably stays closer to the 6% touchdown rate. But I mean, he's done that. And how likely is that? Maybe not the most likely, but I don't think it's far fetched.
No, I don't think so either. Maybe he throws less interceptions. He threw 12 last year, as if that's some crazy number. But
Or
in order to
maybe
finish number one,
they use him on the goal line a ton. So he had 2 rushing scores, and those are exclusively QB sneaks.
yeah.
I know they have Fournette there, who's a big body back. He has some injury concerns himself, but if he sneaks in 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, that could be a big difference too.
Yeah, definitely. The rushing touchdowns are super important for these fantasy guys. So if Tom Brady does get in a couple more times, maybe he doesn't go negative yards in a lot of games by just kneeing at the end of the game. Maybe they keep the games a little bit closer without Bruce Arians, and maybe that's even more beneficial for Tom Brady.
I agree with you. Let's move to QB number 7. So this is the guy I wanted to talk about in conjunction with Dak Prescott. It's Joe Burrow. I think they do a lot of the same things. Neither has the most rushing upside right now. Last year, both of them were coming off lower body injuries. Prescott the ankle, Burrow the ACL. And they're both limited in terms of what they're going to give you on the ground. Burrow finished with 118 yards. He did have 2 rushing scores. They kind of scramble in the same way. I had Burrow ranked below Prescott, and part of the reason was the offense. Dallas is just way more up tempo, way pass heavier, and the efficiency for Burrow is ridiculous. He averaged 9 yards per attempt when you adjust. He was first overall in terms of, third overall in terms of passing yards per game. And that was coming on limited volume. He just did not have the same volume as some of these other passers. So the efficiency to me is something that is due for regression. We just don't see players average 9 yards per attempt without some regression there. And then with the offense being a little run heavier, I'm not sure what Burrow is going to give you on the ground, but it's hard for me to rank him ahead of Prescott. Sell me on this if you can.
Yeah, for me, I think that you can almost think the rushing upside is going to have to go back. In the playoffs, he was rushing a lot more, obviously, because they need to win the games. You're seeing that happen with a lot of the quarterbacks. Josh Allen isn't going to storm through some guy typically in week number 3, but in the playoffs, he's going to be willing to like hurdle over someone like he did up against the Vikings all those years ago. But Joe Burrow, I think the reason why I like him so much is because I think the offensive line being just way better. And it's not even that these are severely better players, way better players. It's just that the offensive line last year was so bad. It was like a turnstile, and the guy was just getting laid out left and right. So now if the offensive line plays better, I'm a little bit more comfortable with Joe Burrow. And the reason why I think his rushing upside will go up is because I think last year early on, he was just nervous to run, right? Because he got hurt the season prior. I think he's tore his ACL, his MCL, and his PCL, the trifecta of ACL tears. Not the best for him, but obviously, I think going forward, he's going to have a little bit more rushing upside. I do agree, though, that his efficiency is likely to go down. He had a 6.5% passing touchdown rate last year. That's very, very high. He's not Tom Brady. I don't think he's going to be able to keep up that same level. He did throw 14 interceptions last year. The team is still very good around him, though. They still have Tyler Boyd for another year. They do still have Jamar Chase, obviously, T. Higgins, and Joe Mixon. They did lose CJ Uzama, but I don't think that's like a humongous hit to the offense, right? It's not like Uzama was Gronk or something. So I think Joe Burrow will be just fine this year. I understand why you think he will regress, but I still think I would have him ranked inside the top 8 and ahead of Dak.
There's this like negative connotation with regression. I don't mean it negatively. I just mean the unsustainability of the stats he was putting out there. For your reference, the chat that is in the comment section, Tom Brady averaged 10 more pass attempts per game than Burrow. 10 more pass attempts, which is just downright ridiculous. And for me, with two non-mobile signal callers, it's hard for me to rank Burrow ahead of Tom Brady. Not only just the pass attempts being down, but overall, Bengals much pass heavier, much slower, and we've seen them embrace the run. They did it for periods of time with Burrow under center last year. They just decided to ride Joe Mixon. And I think a lot of people have recency bias towards those two number one overall finishes Burrow had in weeks 16 and 17, which were the semifinals and finals of your fantasy playoffs. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that had Joe Burrow take them to the ship. But when you look at his ceiling performances throughout the year, he only had 6 top 10 finishes and he only had 3 in the top 5, 2 of them being the last weeks of the season. From there, they go into the playoffs and he only threw 5 touchdowns. So the regression already occurred. It's tough for me to rank him ahead of Prescott, who's going to have way more passing volume, and Brady as well. But ultimately, I think Burrow does have the best skill position players. So would you be surprised if Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd propel him to a top 5 finish? Wouldn't surprise me, but it's a little rich for me. Anything else to add on that?
No, I definitely get your argument. The only reason why I just feel super comfortable with him is because the weapons, like you said, those weapons there in Cincinnati are just, in my opinion, they're better than what Dak has in Dallas.
I agree with you. I think CeeDee Lamb is really the only guy you're excited about in Dallas. And then there's some projection, but Burrow has, 3 bona fide studs. Let's move to number 6. I think we're going to see a lot of agreements in here. Where they slot in position-wise, I think that might be up for a little bit of debate. But at number 6 in our consensus rankings, Jalen Hurts is the guy, the signal caller for the Philadelphia Eagles. The offense, very run-heavy. They were 31st in neutral pass rate. That actually benefits Hurts because of his mobility. This is a guy that rushed for 10 touchdowns last year, 784 yards. And that's fine. I'm okay with the Eagles being run heavy. I like that Hurts is so involved on the ground. I also like that Philadelphia is investing in pass catchers around Hurts. So maybe they're still extremely run heavy, but when Hurts does throw the ball, he's not throwing to Quez Watkins and Jalen Reagor. He'll be throwing to first-round pick Devontae Smith. He'll be throwing to maybe top 5 receiver A.J. Brown. They still have Dallas Goedert in the offense as well. What's the ceiling for Hurts this year?
Yeah, the ceiling for Hurts has to be like the moon, right? Number one. I think that Hurts could easily get that. Last year, like you said, the rushing numbers for him were insane. 140 carries, number 1 at quarterback, 782 rushing yards, number 1 at quarterback, 10 rushing touchdowns, number 1 at quarterback. This is a guy whose numbers are heavily carried by the rushing upside, and he only had a 3.7% passing touchdown rate last season, throwing only 16 passing touchdowns. I'm not saying Jalen Hurts is going to throw 35 passing touchdowns, but he should be over 20 next season, and he should be able to play a full season realistically, just assuming that he's not going to get hurt. He was quarterback 6 in points per game, tied with Aaron Rodgers. He did finish as quarterback 9 on the season, but I think had he have stayed healthy, he would have been closer to the top 5. And to be honest with you, I think it's a little bit crazy how some people have him ranked closer to 10 than 5. I really think that the upside is just immense. And like you said, having A.J. Brown that you can throw the ball to instead of J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and all these other guys that are on the team is just so much better for Jalen Hurts. And I think that the team might be a little bit more confident in Jalen Hurts than the media is kind of saying right now, because there's a lot of talk about how if Jalen Hurts doesn't work out, they're going to draft a new quarterback next year. Maybe that is the case, but I really don't think Jalen Hurts will disappoint. And I honestly think Jalen Hurts is the franchise guy there in Philadelphia.
Well, maybe he disappoints, but what can they do? They tip their hand this year. They don't have any alternatives. Even if Jalen Hurts doesn't play at a starter caliber level, you're still probably getting 12 or more games and likely the entire season just because they don't have a player on the offense that they're trying to evaluate behind him. Through the draft, I think Jalen Hurts' security is now there, which is another positive to him and why he continues to climb the ranks. And I think the additions to the offense are fantastic. When you look at Hurts, he has a ceiling as well. He finished inside the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks on a weekly basis 4 times, and he finished inside the top 10 9 times. Those were higher than Burrow in both regards. So that just speaks to how much the rushing floor gives you. He wasn't even close to Burrow from a pass game perspective, but he still finished in the top 5 and in the top 10 on a weekly basis more often than a guy like Joe Burrow. So again, you seem to be a little bit more bullish on the Hurts talent than me. I think Hurts is a fine quarterback. Is he top 5? Is he top 10 talent wise? Probably not, but that rushing upside just so crucial to fantasy success. That's why Hurts is in the top 6 for us. Anything else to add with Hurts?
No, because I think the top 5 here is where it gets real spicy here.
It is. And if you wanted to rank Hurts in the top 5, I would not be against it. Again, I just think the talent for some of these guys in the top 5 is so ridiculous. And our 5th quarterback here is Justin Herbert. The signal caller for the Los Angeles Chargers just took a massive step forward last year. He's playing in that up-tempo, pass-heavy LA scheme. They're top 5 in plays per game, pass rate overall, neutral game script pass rate. That allowed Herbert to average the second most attempts in the NFL, behind only Tom Brady, second in completion, second in passing yards per game, just shy of 300 yards per game. And what I love about Herbert is he's not a stiff on the ground. He's not Lamar Jackson. He's not Kyler Murray, but he's big and he runs and he'll get touchdowns in the red zone because of his size and his physicality. Finished with 302 rushing yards last year, 3 touchdowns. Again, he's not even Josh Allen, but the rushing upside he does give you increases your floor, increases your ceiling on a week-to-week basis in an offense which is already top 5 in terms of pass rate and play volume. What do you think of Herbert here?
Yeah, this is another situation where my closing point on Russell Wilson is true here because they're in the same division. There are going to be a bunch of games this season where there are shootouts between these teams where they are putting up humongous numbers. And I really do believe that Justin Herbert could be the number one guy. If you rank someone inside the top 5 in my book, you have to almost assume they could be the number one guy. He was quarterback number 2 on the season, quarterback number 2 in points per game. The offense around him is very similar. I think Austin Eckler is probably the most valuable player on this team because if he just dumps the ball off to him, then you're getting the points for that, right? You're getting the points for Justin Herbert throwing the ball 2 yards away from him and Austin Eckler taking it to the house because of how valuable he is to this offense. And it really does seem like Eckler could easily see over 100 targets yet again this season. I think that they bring back Mike Williams. That's very helpful for the team. Keenan Allen, while he's getting older, he is still one of the better route runners in the NFL. And then they have other names on the team, Jalen Guyton. There are some other guys, but those obviously aren't the main pieces. They don't have Jared Cook anymore. They bring in Gerald Everett. Again, not super exciting, but were you even that excited about Cook last year? Probably not. So I think overall, this team is really good offensively. The defense has gotten significantly better, but the biggest issue in the past for the Chargers is they always seem to have a good defense. And then by week number 2, they're all in the hospital. So hopefully this year they're able to stay healthy, but that could be actually negative for Herbert if they are more healthy and they are better, because then maybe he doesn't have to throw the ball as much. And that's something I
Yeah,
always think about.
from a fantasy perspective, you're absolutely right. I like the additions they've made on the offensive line the last 2 years as well. They stole Rashawn Slater last year,
Yeah.
and they take Zion Johnson in the first round to kind of shore up that interior. That should help him at least stay upright a little more often, you would think. So I agree with everything you said with Herbert. I like that he has limited rushing upside, at least more than some of the players we've talked about already. And it does increase his floor ceiling combo. Would not be surprised if he finishes as the first quarterback when it's all said and done. Let's move to quarterback 4. It is going to be Kyler Murray coming off the board. Quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. We've seen Kyler Murray play a little up and down. I actually had him ranked as the QB2, so this should be an interesting discussion point for us. I think it's the biggest difference we have inside the top 5. I'll kind of lay out the bull case for Kyler and then tell me why you might have some concerns, if you can even call them that. He's still a top 5 quarterback for you. First of all, the rushing upside with Kyler is awesome. He had 423 yards last year, 5 scores, and he did get banged up, so a lot of that was front-loaded. The passing stats were solid for him, too. The Arizona Cardinals were 14th in pass rate and neutral game scripts. They were top 10 in play rate. And again, Kyler Murray was awesome in the beginning of the season before he got hurt. This guy had 5 finishes inside the top 5, 8 inside the top 10, and most of those are coming towards the beginning of the season. One concern is the suspension to DeAndre Hopkins. So how does the offense operate without him? Luckily, we got a sample of that last year with Kyler still playing efficient football. With Hopkins out of the lineup, he spent a lot of time injured. They bring in Marquise Brown, I think, which is helpful. They've invested a ton in wide receiver over the last couple of years. Think what you will, the talent of like a Rondale Moore, but he's still a second-round pick and somebody who has a ceiling at the position. They have veterans like A.J. Green, Zach Ertz. They drafted another tight end, the number 1 tight end on most people's boards, in Trey McBride this year. What do you think of Kyler in Arizona ahead of the 2022 season?
Yeah, the DeAndre Hopkins suspension didn't make me move Kyler Murray at all. I basically just stood with where I had him. Hollywood Brown joining the team does kind of even that out are Hollywood Brown as well as DeAndre Hopkins, the same wide receiver. Of course not, they're very different, but the fact that he does still have like a number one guy, in my opinion, on his team makes me a little bit more comfortable with Kyler Murray. I think the biggest discrepancy between us and where we had him ranked and why he finishes as quarterback 4 instead of a little bit higher probably has nothing to do with the fact that I think that Kyler Murray is a bad player by any means, right? He was quarterback number 4 in points per game last season. It's just more that I like the other quarterbacks ranked ahead of him slightly better. Again, it is splitting hairs when you get this high up at the quarterback position. I am going to be drafting a lot of Kyler Murray in Underdog Drafts, the sponsor of today's video, because of the fact that he does go as quarterback 5, quarterback 6 in those drafts. And I just feel like the odds that he finishes much higher than that are pretty high. I think that Kyler Murray is going to put up yet another fantastic season. The only issue with Kyler Murray is for some reason he just does not throw a lot of touchdowns. And I can't really figure out why. He had a 5% passing touchdown rate last year, 24 passing touchdowns. The rushing upside is obviously why you like him so much, but I would like to see him get closer to like 30 passing touchdowns, and then he really could be the number one guy.
Dude, it's just Kingsbury's kicking all those field goals from the 10-yard line in the red zone.
You're definitely right about that.
Oh, it was atrocious. I like Kyler, I think, just a little more than you, and you put it a good way. I really do think we're splitting hairs. It's tough to decide really between any of these quarterbacks in the top 5, but we're just one season removed from Kyler Murray rushing for 819 yards and 11 scores. This is one of, I think, 2 quarterbacks in the NFL, maybe 3 if you include Hurts, maybe 4 if you include Lance, I guess, but I really think one of 2 quarterbacks that has 1,000-yard rushing upside. He was very close to it in a 16-game season in 2020. Last year, he was injured midway through the season, which really limited that output. But we're not that far removed from that 819-yard season. But overall, I think we're pretty much in lockstep with Murray. Immense ceiling, and you and I both have him ranked ahead of the industry consensus right now. Anything else to add?
Yeah, and even like you said, even though he didn't have a crazy rushing season, when he's not having this crazy rushing season, he's still top 4 in carries, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns. So even when he doesn't hit that ceiling, he's still very consistent with running the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Let's move to quarterback 3. It is Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs. You all know him. You all love him. He lost Tyreek Hill. The players that have come in, not on Tyreek Hill's level, we have Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They drafted Sky Moore. I think they will have some trouble replacing some of that production, but ultimately, Mahomes has been able to get it done regardless. He had 10 finishes in the top 10 last year. He had 5 finishes in the top 5. He was 3rd in overall attempts per game, 3rd in completions per game, 5th in pass yards per game. So maybe due for some positive regression there. The Chiefs were throwing the ball at the 3rd highest rate in neutral game scripts. They were 4th in plays per game. So they were pass heavy. They were up tempo. They didn't really invest in the run game much. They bring over Ronald Jones. Think of that what you will. But I think this bodes well for Patrick Mahomes, at least from a volume perspective. What do you think of the efficiency? What do you think of the ceiling with Mahomes? You and I seem to be pretty much in lockstep with where we were last year with Mahomes. Top 3 signal caller overall, despite the loss of Tyreek Hill. What do you make of the situation?
Yeah. Now you mentioned that no one is gonna join the team be the caliber of Tyreek Hill. I don't even think it's possible to find someone that is the caliber of Tyreek Hill because Tyreek Hill is such a just a different talent of player in the NFL. There's only one Tyreek Hill. I do believe that there are going to be people that try to get a little bit spicy, try to say, "Oh, Patrick Mahomes lost Tyreek Hill, so he's going to finish outside the top 5." I think anyone who's saying that is just flat out crazy. He still
I
has
agree
Kelsey.
with you. I agree with you. And that's why, I mean, I have him as a top 3 signal caller as well. He doesn't rush as much as some other signal callers, but he's certainly in like the Justin Herbert vein. He was at 381 rushing yards last year. And that's something we've seen him increasingly do. And I think it's because of the coverage that's played against him. You remember like midseason when there was all this talk, like Patrick Mahomes was solved by the too high look. You remember that? Yeah. That kind of corresponded with him not only taking what was underneath with Tyreek Hill and kind of just letting Tyreek cook, but you would see DBs turn their back to Mahomes and then he could display some of his athleticism. And don't get me wrong, we're going to say this a lot. He's not Lamar Jackson, but he's mobile enough to pick up first downs and get you those scrappy yards. So I like that he's added that to his game.
Yeah, like you were talking about, it's so funny that like a couple weeks in the season, people are talking about how Patrick Mahomes is washed. He's never gonna be the guy that he was. Like, what are you talking about? We're like 4 weeks into the season. He's having like a down season, but his down season is like better than most quarterbacks in the NFL. Last year, he threw 13 interceptions. But if you were watching the games, I remember the ball just bouncing off of Tyreek's hands, just doing all types of crazy shit. So 13 interceptions really isn't super telling for Pat Mahomes. He had a 5.6% passing touchdown rate last year. Maybe he falls off slightly because Tyreek Hill is gone. But again, rank him outside the top five is just egregious. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the number one guy. When you rank someone in the top five, again, I want to further this point. You have to, in my opinion, believe he could be the number one guy if you're willing to pull the trigger. I think Pat Mahomes' ADP is going to stay around quarterback two. I don't think people are really willing to, most casual fans, right, in your fantasy football league, Jim from accounting isn't going to go ahead and draft Pat Mahomes as like quarterback six off the board. So you're still going to have to pay the pretty price for Pat Mahomes, but I think he could still pay off that way.
Yeah, you already mentioned the division, talking about some other signal callers here. I think that that is another point that you could just harp on. This division is going to be fireworks whenever they face each other. So I like Pat Mahomes a lot. Really hard not to, honestly. Let's go to quarterback two, and I think this might be the most controversial ranking within our top five. You and I are still very high on Lamar Jackson, and we know why. He's a former MVP. The rushing upside is that of Kyler Murray. This guy has a very clear path to 1,000 yards in the ground if he doesn't get hurt. The big thing is Lamar Jackson's been hurt a lot. And last year we saw that really affect him. Somehow we still finished with 767 rushing yards, only 2 scores on the ground. So there is some positive regression in his future. With Lamar Jackson, I think the main concern is he never really took that step forward as a passer. And last year the Ravens offense morphed a little bit. They were definitely a little more pass heavy. They finished 23rd in neutral game pass rate. Previously, they'd been like 31st, 32nd, 30th. So they did attempt to play with a faster pace and play with a higher pass rate. And that didn't necessarily go well. Lamar Jackson gets hurt and they kind of revert back. But their moves this offseason suggest that they're going to move back to this run-heavy approach. They trade Marquise Brown. They really don't add any pass catchers of consequence. So I think they're gearing up full run-heavy Lamar Jackson again. What do you make of the situation in 2020?
Yeah, last season, the running back core just got hurt before week one even started, right? They lost Dobbins, they lost Edwards, they lost all these guys. We had to see Le'Veon Bell run the football. So that is just very telling about where the Baltimore Ravens were last season. Like you said, Lamar Jackson only played in 12 games and was still top 2 in carries and rushing yards at the quarterback position. Like you said, he did only have 2 rushing touchdowns, so that is bound to increase. This is a situation, again, where you are just heavily relying on the rushing upside. If Lamar Jackson doesn't get close to 800, 900, 1,000 rushing yards, then you may be a little bit disappointed because he was only quarterback number 8 in points per game on the season. You can kind of throw away the quarterback 16 finish at the end of the year because he only played in 12 games, right? The points per game number is what matters to me. He was tied with Dak Prescott in the points per game number. I expect him to throw more touchdowns than 16. He was only at a 4.2% rate. I think Lamar Jackson could be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL yet again. And it's very telling about how good this system is in Baltimore when Tyler Huntley gets to go in the game and basically plays like Lamar Jackson.
You spoke to the low touchdown rate. That probably would have been at least 5% if Marquise Brown wasn't dropping bombs left and right. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Marquise Brown dropping touchdowns. But I like that this team invested in the offensive line. They spent a lot of premier picks on the position. They took Tyler Linderbaum to play center. That's been a hole for them. It's not the same Ravens offensive line of old. They draft some developmental guys on day 2. Bernard Raymond out of Central Michigan. Daniel Falele, who's probably the closest person in the NFL to the character in Game of Thrones, the Mountain. The guy is 6'8", nearly 400 pounds. The dude is a monster. I don't know about his future prospects, but man, he's a mammoth of a man. With Lamar, it comes down to health, in my opinion. If he can orchestrate this run-heavy attack, he's going to be a top 5 signal caller at the very least with that 1,000-yard rushing upside and then whatever gives you through the air. And that rushing upside just so important here. Anything else to add?
Yeah, no, not much. And this is just very telling based on what we've been saying on how good Mark Andrews could potentially be. I know he was the number 1 tight end last year, but it could easily be a repeat.
For sure. No more Marquise Brown, only Rashad Bateman, who was up and down at best. Let's move to QB1. It's our guy, Josh Allen, coming out of the draft, coming out of Wyoming. Man, people were down on this guy, and I don't think there's anyone criticizing him at this point. He plays in one of the best systems overall for a quarterback. They're extremely pass heavy. They were second in neutral game pass script. They're fast. They were top 6 in play rate. They ran 4 wide receivers more than any other team. They lost their OC, Brian Daboll, but they promoted in-house with Ken Dorsey. That should keep the offense fairly consistent. And Allen has that immense rushing upside, 763 yards, 6 scores, and we've seen that number push 8, 7, 8 at times. So a couple extra rushing touchdowns wouldn't surprise anybody. There's just really nothing bad to say about Josh Allen at this point. The volume's there, the talent's there, the rushing upside's there. Can you talk me out of him as QB1?
No, I mean, they lost Cole Beasley. They lost Emmanuel Sanders. Who cares, right? It's still Josh Allen. Josh Allen still has immense rushing upside. Like you said, he had 112 carries last year, third at quarterback, 763 rushing yards, third at quarterback, 6 rushing touchdowns, third at quarterback. What can't this guy do? Early on in his career, there was a lot of talk about where there'd be someone wide open. He just overthrows him, right? Because his arm is so powerful. He doesn't know how to control it. And then recently we saw this guy has amazing accuracy. If you don't have Josh Allen ranked number 1, I think you're a little bit crazy, if I'm being honest with you. I just feel that he's super safe as the number 1 guy.
Yeah, I like him too. And I honestly I think there were some additions by subtraction, like losing Beasley, losing Sanders doesn't mean a lot to me. They bring in Jamison Crowder, who I honestly think is better than Beasley. We already saw Gabe Davis play in that elevated role with Emmanuel Sanders hurt. So that's not a projection either. And we even saw players like Isaiah McKenzie take on a larger role down the stretch. They got an amazing pick in Khalil Shakir in the 5th round out of Boise State, who's a player I like a lot. They add a premier pass catching back in James Cook to a backfield that already has Devin Singletary, who played reasonably well down the stretch. The offensive line is still intact, and they've even made additions to the defense. Man, it's really hard to poke holes in Josh Allen, and outside of an injury, I just don't see him finishing outside of the top 3.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think Josh Allen is probably the safest quarterback going into next season, and the projection for the Buffalo Bills has to be they're basically Super Bowl or bust at this point.
Yeah, they're going for it, and I think it makes a lot of sense they bring in Von Miller. Let's see the Bills finally take that next step. But that'll do it for us today. Again, just to recap, we had our consensus QBs: number 12, Matthew Stafford; number 11, Russell Wilson; number 10, Trey Lance; number 9, Dak Prescott; number 8, Tom Brady; number 7, Joe Burrow; 6 was Jalen Hurts; 5, Justin Herbert; 4, Kyler Murray; 3, Patrick Mahomes; 2, Lamar Jackson; and number 1, Josh Allen. This was a lot of fun, man, and we're going to continue this. We're doing receivers through the next couple days. We'll have running backs towards the end of the week as well, so make sure to continue watching these ranking reveal shows ahead of the 2020 fantasy football season. Anything else to add before we get out of here?
No, I think we did a great job today. I hope you guys did end up enjoying the video, and let us know down below in the comments section what we have wrong, right? What you think is different. Like, there's going to be some names where, you should have put this guy in the top 10 that isn't even ranked inside our top 12. So let me know down below in the comments. I love talking to you guys.
Oh, dude, I live in Wisconsin. Wait for the Aaron Rodgers. Wait for the Aaron Rodgers takes. We don't have him in our top 12, but it is coming. But thank you guys for watching. He is Nick Lepri. You can find him on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. I am Matt Gajewski. You can find me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. We will see you guys again later this week with more ranking reveal shows. But thank you for watching this video, and we will catch you again next time.